Let's have a chat.
Let's,
you and me.
Let's have it.
Let's talk about the basic, fundamental, key concepts that you need to know before you even begin the process of sort of crime scene analysis and crime reconstruction.
Yes.
The problem with this conversation is it almost starts the same way every time. You have to first talk about why forensic science and crime reconstruction, crime scene analysis, criminal profiling, why these things are so interesting. Why? And it's because they're on film and TV.
Of course.
All the time. There is no shortage of television programs that are looking to depict violent crime, sex crime, rape, homicide, terrorism, all this stuff through the lens of the criminal profiler, through the lens of the crime scene investigator, through the lens of people who are working with dead bodies, working with blood, working with the consequences of violence.
Yes.
Right? And it's gotten to the point where even the stuff that's in places like Australia and Great Britain have their people running around with guns, where they don't.
Right, exactly.
They don't use guns. They don't use guns. They don't have guns. And if you were to watch those programs, you'd think that everybody was the same as the United States.
Yeah.
And it's not. So the first thing at the outset you have to understand is, if you're somebody from Australia, from Great Britain, your experience with violent crime is going to be very different than someone from the United States or Mexico. And if you're someone from the United States, your experience with violent crime is going to seem bad until you go to Latin America.
Yes.
Right? Because it's much worse. So we already have, at the outset, there's an illusion that's created that there are people who have a great deal of special experience and special knowledge, and that they run around with guns solving violent crime, right?
Yeah. And the idea of special knowledge that comes to being crime scenes, you know, because like as you said, you know, in order to a movie to move forward, they need to have this insight fantasy. Like there's this investigator who are in some places and then start thinking in some terms, and then he got it, or he's in his house and seeing a lot of pictures in a wall, and then seeing it, of course, you know, the eureka moment. But the problem with the crime scene is one part, the processing is one thing, the analysis is one thing, and there's a lot of things doing around that.
Also, there is the reason that the culture, the criminal justice culture, buys into this and doesn't seek to correct it too much is because it creates the illusion that the reason there are so many unsolved cases is that there are so few people with this special ability.
Yes.
And that is simply not the case. The reason there are so many unsolved cases is because, one, time and money are not spent on most cases, and two, most people don't have basic education and training in criminal investigation, forensic science, crime scene investigation, crime reconstruction, the things you need to solve cases.
Of course.
So, at the outset, we have this problem. And
what book is this?
This is chapter 5 from Forensic Investigation that was published last year by myself and Jody Freeman with help from Aurelio and Mike McGrath and Stan Crowder and Jerry Chisholm. How this works is that we have this idea of forensic science as science that's sort of fast food forensics.
Yes.
Like it should be like making a taco or making a cheeseburger. It should be very easy, very simple, anybody can do it. But then only people with a super special ability have the special insight. Because the reality is, there are, if you have the right training, if you have the right education, it's not difficult, it just takes time. It's labor intensive, it's thought intensive. You're not going to be able to get away with that with taking shortcuts. And if you take shortcuts, there will be consequences. And the science works like this. The faster you go, the lower the quality.
Yes.
That's how, there's no other way to put it. It's just like food. The longer you take, potentially the better the quality. Potentially. Right. All right, so what is the CSI effect? The CSI effect is what we were just kind of talking about. The idea that a television show is where people get their ideas about crime and crime solving. And the people who are, a lot of times there are people who are hired to be involved in as technical advisors to the show to lend their credibility to it. In fact, from the early days of shows like Millennium and Profiler, you had FBI profilers lending their credibility to these ideas of psychic visions and psychic thoughts, and because they actually believe that that's part of it. If you read their their biographies, they write about psychic ability being part of it. Even though that's a disproven, fraudulent notion, that's something they embrace. And I think that comes from not really understanding how crime works.
Or even these new shows, Hannibal.
Hannibal,
this guy
that's right.
has these, mirror neurons.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to, he's not psychic. It's because he's super smart.
Because he's able to wipe away certain
hyper
elements.
empathy. And then,
Super empathetic, right. It's almost, again, but it comes in flashes.
Of course, because he's better for a TV
And-
show that lasts 15 minutes.
Right, and even real people who do the work for real, when they do TV shows, very often they incorporate a psychic element because they think people need that to be entertained. That's not the purpose. You have to understand that the reason to do forensic casework is not for entertainment.
Yes.
We're not trying to entertain. We are trying to work cases to solve a problem or to find out what happened, not to make people happy.
Exactly.
Or to make them feel pleasure. That's not going to, but just to be very clear, that's not going to happen. You're going to be unhappy.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry about that. But it's work. It's good work and it's rewarding work. It can be fulfilling when you do it right, but it's not, you're not doing it to be entertained. So in the early years of CSI, back in 2000, 2001, it was billed as a scientifically accurate show. And myself and several other people got together and sort of took to task the producers on public discussion forums these very issues of accuracy and scientific efficacy. And basically, at the first few years, they fought back. Oh, we're this, we're that, we're that. And then eventually they had to admit that they were just making stuff up. And the reality is that they have people that were there that were giving advice who were working for sheriff's departments who were not properly trained, who believed that police officers and criminalists were the same thing. And they were trying to put that view of the world onto the professional community because they wanted it to be true. And by making a successful TV show out of it, they kind of made it, people think that it was true.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Because they need fewer characters, right?
Basically, it's promoting unrealistic ideas of technology and giving unrealistic expectations to jurors about what science is capable of doing. And it cuts both ways. On the one hand, the jurors might expect more than science can deliver, so that creates a problem. But on the other hand, the criminal justice professions kind of ride a wave of confidence that they haven't actually earned. There's this idea that there's super technology, super capable detectives, super research, super surveillance, all this stuff is going on, and that will be used to compel somebody to confess or be used to compel people to say things. That image, that reputation will be used to get results that would be unachievable without their reputation.
Yes.
So that's, again, there are shows like Bones, Criminal Minds, Dexter, things like that that have always pushed the envelope or just outright fabricated notions of science. And the problem is, in the vacuum of actual education and training on forensic science, real professionals will believe those TV shows. They'll believe that that's possible.
That's the biggest problem, right?
Yeah. Well, not just the biggest problem. It's not just that. The biggest problem is real professionals believing it, but we also have another problem, which is students coming into the profession who lack mentorship. They see these shows, and they think that's the way it's going to be for them. Or worse, the pseudo-attributional effect,
yes,
where they think this is the way they have to behave to be perceived as a professional. And because other professionals are ignorant and don't actually know enough about the science to evaluate what they're seeing, they see the person wearing the costume and they think, well, they must be legit.
Yeah. That's why now so many universities, criminology, that has nothing to do with this, they're doing this time after time practices with people dressing like that and taking pictures and blah, 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 because exactly, they want to validate practices that are not really what they're talking about.
Right. So if they do a crime scene workshop, there'll be a mannequin on the floor, there'll be some fake blood on the ground, and then they'll put everybody in Tyvek suits, give them gloves and goggles, and have them walk around trying to collect evidence in a way that would never be done in a real crime scene.
Yeah, of course.
And things that are completely irrelevant to the crime.
Yeah.
And just to be going through the motion. What we talked about before. Talk about this a little bit. The bureaucratic nature of crime scene processing and crime reconstruction. There's a bureaucracy to it, which is you're locked into this way of doing things that people don't understand why they're doing it. They do it anyway, so they're just trying to go through the motions to appear to be doing something, when in fact, since they don't know why they're doing it, they don't know what's important about it, they're only emulating what they've seen. There's not actually a result that's scientific or reliable.
Yeah, the problem is everybody wants to do their part, and their part is part of a larger problem that is not the case theory, it's just a bunch of people doing things. Like I do fingerprints, so
Yep.
they only do fingerprints, and they only thinking in terms of discovering fingerprints and do something with them.
Right.
I'm doing blood patterns. I'm only splattering. I'm not just doing that. Psychologists do the same. I'm gonna see the clinical issues of the victims.
Right.
Because they're not thinking in terms of what happened.
Right.
They're not thinking in terms of what we need to verify all these things to know what happens, because that's the job of the prosecutor, that's the job of the defense. But that's the problem, it's the job of everybody.
It's actually every single person has something to bring to bear, and there should be somebody who's a scientist who's putting it all together.
Yes.
Who's doing the actual reconstruction. All right. And that's what's very often missing. That usually gets supplanted by either a detective who takes on that role inappropriately, or a lawyer who takes on that role inappropriately, and then they shift and manipulate things to keep other things from being tested, to keep their theories safe. Well, let's talk about. So these TV shows have had an impact. They create an image, and that image is something that people try to live up to, as opposed to knowing why they're doing it. They're just, as my son is as fond of saying, they're not real professionals. They're just copies of professionals.
Yes.
They're just a photocopy, and they don't know why they're wearing the jacket. They don't know why they're wearing gloves. They don't know why they're over here next to the body, but they think that's where I have to be. This creates a problem, crime scene, because when there's a response to a crime scene, it's a very human, very emotional thing, especially if you have a dead body or a victim at the scene.
Of course.
Everybody wants to be there and see. Not everybody who's there to look has a role or even knows what they're supposed to be doing. They just want to be near the action so they can say they were near the action. If you were in a crime scene, standing in it, and you didn't have a job to do, you were contaminating the crime scene. You were actually not a professional. You are a problem. You are a liability. And what I see over and over again in the crime scene photos that I review are professionals wandering around inside crime scenes who then later go on and say, oh, I was in the crime scene.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, ooh, you were in the crime scene. Well, I don't really care about that. I care about what was your job and were you doing it? Were you assigned to be inside the tape? Or were you just wandering around like an idiot trying to be part of the action? Because you're a wannabe.
These psychic flashbacks.
Well, that too,
but
I find that most of these guys are like the little storytellers. They want to capture the story so they can tell later. I was in it, and they want to be able to tell their buddies at the bar.
Yeah.
I was in it. I saw this. I smelled that. Really? Should you even be talking about this? No.
Yeah.
I do, 100 cases a year easily, and I talk about maybe 5 of them because that's all the ones I can talk about because of the confidentiality agreements I have.
Yeah.
And if I'm in a crime scene, I will never talk about it until much, much later. And my role will be very specific or very limited. And it's not it's not barroom talk. Unless there's an educational feature to it, which I put into a presentation.
And also, let's think when the CSI effect, obviously it's a social cognitive problem, but also comes to a historical problem. When science can become more relevant in courtrooms, and science in general, because we're seeing now another phenomenon is scienticism, that people think science can solve everything,
right?
Philosophical problems,
right?
And everything, science is everything, science is the truth. No, if you're a real scientist, you know that science have some boundaries, some standards.
That's the definition of science, is to set limits on things. That's what you're supposed to be doing.
But then you start hearing some criminalists saying that there's no perfect crime. You can solve everything if you look for it. It's like science cannot do some things because some samples, some evidence will last forever,
right? Because
the nature of the evidence, or the nature, like you say, of technology, or wherever, because that's what real scientists do. The problem is that people pretend to be scientists. In Latin America, we have this big problem. People who are doing this type of works are not training scientists. They are lawyers. They are people from accountability. They're big, and they take some courses and they think they become scientists.
So I was in Atlanta a couple weekends ago talking to our class there, and there was a workshop, or not a workshop, a symposium for the weekend being put on by a law school, and it was like advances in forensic science and innocence whatever. Sounds great. On the panel, 12 lawyers.
Exactly.
One guy from NIST who's a supervisor, not a criminalist, and some other scientist who's not even a forensic scientist, works for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. No, works for the U.S. military.
Another problem that comes along.
Works for the U.S. Military Crime Lab.
Yeah.
Who I happen to know shut down the NAS report, the National Academy's report at his location, saying ignore it because it's not relevant to us because we're the military and can do what we want.
One of the most important pieces of
Exactly. So the point is, very often these programs are being fronted and written by lawyers.
Yes.
Because they want to be the ones in control of the actual evidence. What they are in control of is theory development and admissibility.
Yes.
That they are not scientists and they're not in control of science. Yeah. And that's the problem, is having lawyers be the ones who dictate science. The best clients that I have, the ones that get the most out of using someone like myself to educate them, are those that approach me and say, here's the evidence, tell me what you see.
Yeah.
I want to know what's going on, and they don't want to tell me nothing, they don't want to talk to me about it. They want me to educate them because they have their ideas and they know they're already tainted and polluted 6 ways from Sunday. They want somebody who's an actual professional to tell them what's really going on, as opposed to infect me with their theories up front.
Of course.
They want to learn. They're not there to get me to say what they want to hear. In fact, if you got a lawyer who's any good, they are not interested in you if you will tell them what they want to hear.
Well,
they want to hear the truth.
They want the information so they can know, they can plan a strategy.
They want a strategy that'll work when the truth comes out, not a way to manipulate the truth to get what they want. Those are 2 very different kinds of attorneys, and I won't work for the other kind. So, it's very interesting. So this is a guy named Tim Cooperschmidt. He's from Sorensen Forensics. He's the executive director, and I like him because he's actually put together a list of myths about CSI. Basically, he says they've got a lot. He says the same kind of things I do, which is these shows have a lot of great entertainment value, a lot of things that are in them that don't happen in the real world. You can't identify a person's DNA and then have a picture pop up 5 minutes later. That's not how it works. DNA takes, sometimes a week or more, or with backlogs, years.
There's no database with
there are 0 databases that connect your DNA or your fingerprints with your photograph, with your photo. Those databases do not exist. No. So that's fake. But the popularity of those shows makes people think that they are real. And police don't want you to believe they're
cannot exist because there's a very intricate human rights problems with that.
Right.
It's not like, okay, let's have everybody's DNA.
You can't just have that. Exactly right. All right, so he basically also says that they don't all go driving around in the nicest cars or in Hummers and have the top technology. It's not like that. There's not the money for the kind of expenditures you see in TV shows.
And they're also beautiful. And as you see,
let me tell you something really fun. One of the things I love about British television is they put normal looking people on TV. British TV is the best because they put normal looking people like you and me on television.
We're below normal, but it's okay. I know what your point.
So in the United States, there are surgical procedures you have to go on before you're allowed near a camera. They're not going to invest in you unless unless you're proportionate perfectly.
Yes.
So, or you fit a particular type.
And they have, they speak a lot of languages.
Yep.
And they have
perfect
IQs,
recall.
Whatever.
All of them have eidetic memories. All of them.
Yes, exactly.
Eidetic memory. I can remember everything that I see.
Yeah.
All of them have that.
And that's not a thing.
Or if they're not, if they don't have eidetic memories, they're all like, oh, I'm just on the spectrum. I'm autistic, so I see in 3 dimensions. Okay, that's great, and that works so well in real life when autistic people solve crime. I would like to see a real TV show that involves someone with actual autism working on a case.
We should do that. We should do a commentary.
No.
That will be so.
It was so bad.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing is. He tells the truth about the number of cases. If you're actually a professional, you work a lot of cases, you can't follow them all through. Some people will come to me and go, oh, do you remember this case? I'm like, I remember the case that I worked on it. Well, do you know what's happened since then? Well, no, because I have other things that I do. I don't follow them. I get asked on the stand by attorneys, didn't you follow this case? Don't you know what happened during the appeal? Why would I care what happened during the appeal? That's illegal. I always say the same thing. These are legal decisions. The science is there. The science is solid. I involve myself with the science. You're talking about the concerns of the lawyer that should never have anything to do with the science.
Sometimes it's related to what you do. Sometimes it has nothing.
Sometimes it has nothing, right? Unless it has directly to do with my evidence.
Always, it will be very interesting to follow it.
Right, but it would be very interesting, but we don't always have the time, nor is it really our concern.
You're working on other stuff.
Exactly. If you're working on other things, you don't have the time to do that. But more importantly, it's not necessary for your work. You do your piece, and then it gets admitted into court. and then that court makes decisions about that have nothing to do with you. You cannot control that. So if you try to control it, you try to follow it, it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good, unless it's related to your evidence. If it's related to your evidence, then of course you have to follow it. But usually it's not. Let's see. The other thing is that you can't have people who are being in law enforcement and working in the crime lab examining evidence. He says that should be obvious, but it's not for some people. For some people, you create a model based on a TV show. A lot of agencies don't have the right people in their employ to actually create an agency. So they go, okay, we want you to create a unit that does this. Why do you want to do that? Well, because the director saw the TV show last night. He thinks we should have one of those. It used to be I was not able to make this argument because people would say, well, you're making that up. Nobody would be that way. Well, we now have a president of the United States who, when he sees something on television, he wants that for us. And he doesn't understand the consequences of it. He doesn't understand the cost of it. And he doesn't understand the logistics of it. He'll just see it on TV and want it to be made real. He's emblematic of many of the bureaucrats that I've met.
That's why they start having in Latin America and other countries these criminal profiling units that there can be useful.
They can be,
but they don't know how to use it. So
or they don't know what criminal profiling is.
They put a lot of psychologists.
Well, they hire somebody who they think should be something like that, and what happens is professional hubris. The professional does not have
hubris. Yes.
They don't have the ability to say no. What you should do, if somebody asks you to do a job that you're not qualified to do, or you don't have the training to do, what's the only answer? I'm not the person to do that. I don't have that background.
Yeah.
Let me point you to somebody who is. And if you don't know the right person to point them to, then maybe that's an indication that you're not the right person to be talking about in this conversation to begin with. You're not the right person to even be in the conversation. So let's do this very quickly, these top 10. Crime labs can gather, prepare, test, and have results from DNA and other forensic tests within a few hours. That is false. That is a very common misconception, right? Yeah. The speed with which forensic results can be achieved, it's very slow. Especially toxicology reports. Toxicology reports take up to 3 weeks. That's from when they're started. The reality is not many places even have the time to get it within the right time frame. It's not like they have nothing else and you can just do it. And
not all the samples can get a result.
That's right. Sometimes the samples are contaminated, they're mixed up, they're not stored right, not properly collected, or they get lost.
They get lost.
2, a suspect will sit in an interrogation room wearing the same clothes he wore during the crime, and a conclusive test results will arrive as you sit down to question them. You don't ever get the lab results for a test that you're doing after you've arrested a guy at the scene, and then they are not wearing the clothes. Clothes must be collected as evidence from everybody.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. Since we see this on TV, we see more investigators not collecting clothes because they don't understand it's necessary because they're getting their training from television, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I can tell you dozens of cases I've had just exactly like that, where they come back and they realize they should have collected clothes. They come back a couple weeks later. Oh, do you still have those bloody things you were wearing? Oh yeah, sure, here you go.
Or they collect it, but they don't test it.
They collect it and they sit on it, right? Or they collect it and they collected it properly.
Yeah.
Happens a lot. So there's either perfunctory, they collect it without knowing why it's being collected, or they don't collect it at all because they don't understand why it's important because they're watching television to get their training.
Exactly.
All right? So crime scene investigators follow cases from start to finish and conclude investigations within a few days. The magic 48, the golden 48 hours.
48 hours.
Golden 72, golden 48. I don't know where that notion came from except for from television, because it's not real. That's not how casework works. Every case unfolds in its own organic feature, and the idea that the solvability drops out after 48 hours, that has nothing to do with the evidence. It has to do with the attitudes of the investigators. You can change that immediately by just having the detective work.
Yes.
The problem is bureaucrats and lazy detectives making decisions about how much energy and effort to put into a case. If it doesn't solve within 48 hours, it's not solved. No, that's just some TV statistic. You need to actually work your cases, and they take as long as they take.
Yes.
That's how it works. Sometimes they take days, sometimes years. The problem that we have is that most of the people working cases, working homicides, the largest proportion of them are going to be domestics, or they're going to be homicides where people know each other. So very little criminal investigations involved. There's evidence collection, but not a lot of investigation. There's a lot of you know who did it, you're just gathering evidence, all right? But in a case where it's a stranger crime, that requires real criminal investigation. That requires real effort, real energy, and that takes a lot of time. So you can't compare the two.
Oh, who that is? That is the sound of a.
Hold on.
Hey, my wife has a key to our apartment. Just came back.
We're renting this, we're renting this site.
Yeah, we're renting
You
this.
guys are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's
I'm
in
sorry.
the other.
Where's the daughter?
There's two of them.
I
There's
don't
two
know
of them.
about
There's one over there.
Is the daughter here? She's here?
No, nobody's here. We are one unit in the center. There's a unit over there. and
Right,
there's a unit
we're
over
in
there.
that unit. We're in that outside unit.
Yeah. So
My wife has a key. I left her at the function, and I forgot the key.
I don't have any.
No, I thought you were the owner.
No. The owner is not even in this.
Because we met him earlier, and then he said his daughter was going to be around.
No. Sorry about
I'm
that.
sorry. No, I'm sorry to bother you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Thanks, man.
All right.
That was so. That's the daughter of the blonde lady.
Are you the daughter of that?
totally.
Are you trying to?
All right.
I'm just doing my,
Give it give it a moment. We'll fade back in.
This is for edition. When I do this, it's because we're starting again.
What are you doing again?
Yes. This is when you're. If you do edition, you will understand.
All right. The other idea is that you said, you follow from start to finish. You conclude in just a few days. That's not a real thing. But also, the idea that crime scene investigators can get DNA from any surface. Now, you can get it from some surfaces. You can get it from a lot of surfaces. Not every surface, and not every time.
Not even cigarettes.
Not even cigarettes every time.
They do cigarettes every time. No, well.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And it has to do with how it's collected, how it's stored, how long it sat under what conditions before it was collected, and then the competence and capability of the person doing the examination. All these things are variables.
They can be in a warm weather. They can be
Wet,
you know what I mean?
frozen. Well, I had a case one time
Biology.
where the detective said, I got cigarette butts. This is back in 2002, 2003. He said, I got cigarette butts. Can we get DNA from them? I said, well, I know some people that can do it, but if you send it to the people at the lab where you're at, they will not be able to do it. And I had another case where the guy called me and said, yeah, my lab said they couldn't do that. Is that what they're saying? It's not possible? I said, no, they're being honest. They can't do it, but there's another lab that can. They're just not being completely honest with
Yeah.
you. The technology exists, but they're not able to do it. And that's helpful and unhelpful at the same time. So also, the DNA is not a binary thing. The DNA has nothing to do with guilt, all right? DNA, a big misconception is if we have DNA, that means the person's responsible for the crime. If you don't have DNA, that means they're innocent. That's not how DNA works. In order to make DNA relevant, there has to be a reconstruction of the crime, of the events surrounding it. Like we talked about with Lobato, it's not just the presence or absence of evidence, it's the context of that evidence. Like we talked about with the bottle of Resolve carpet cleaner.
Yes.
If there's just because there's cleaner at the location
That
doesn't mean it was
mean-
used to clean up the crime. It doesn't mean it was used by the offender. It doesn't even mean it was involved in the crime. It just means it was there. Now we have to establish its relationship, if any. The other thing is, crime scene investigators can gather DNA, and that DNA can be sourced back to a particular body fluid or a particular area of the body. Certain cells have certain shapes, and you can determine in general where certain cells came from. The physical structure of the cell is particular. That is not DNA. All right, so the cellular structure will give you something potentially, but not always. And then the DNA does not give you anything related to that. If
Yeah, it's
you've got-
more like a chemistry analysis of
Yeah.
the biological sample. It's not the DNA by itself.
That's right. So you would need two separate tests there. You need one,
Yes.
you need somebody who's good at examining the cellular structure. You need them to look at it, but then you also need the DNA analyst. Those are two very separate tests. They can be useful, or maybe it'll be too generic and they won't be able to tell.
Of course.
But it's not for certain every time. All right. So you can't always tell if it came from tears, saliva, sweat, or cremated remains. This is just not how it works. Can't always. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. The next thing is the big one we talked about before. Everyone's in a DNA database. You're not. You're not. Not everyone's in a DNA database. There are human rights issues. There's civil rights issues relating to that. I was involved one time in a DNA dragnet situation that I thought was very productive and actually was. And at the end of it, we destroyed all the samples.
Yes.
We did not put them into a database. I don't have them in a database. I destroyed the samples. I don't care about the
Think
ones
in terms of the problem that we having right now with the Facebook information leaking
Yes.
problem.
Yes.
It's a very big problem. There's a lot of laws that protects individuals to have their information exposed.
Right.
So DNA obviously is one of those
Right.
type of information that are very important.
Yeah, and it would be a huge problem for it to be database inappropriate. There has to be a law on the books requiring that it be collected under certain circumstances before that can happen. But here's the secret about that. Just because there's a law on the books saying that they have to do it, doesn't mean they have the money to do it, and doesn't mean they are doing it every time.
Yeah.
I've worked many cases where there's a law that a felon has to have their DNA in a database, and they're like 10 years behind in certain states.
That's what happened even with fingerprints.
Oh, fingerprints are the worst.
Yeah, they think, no, we have these databases of fingerprints. No, you don't. You
You have some, for
have
some people.
Some, and they're not working, and how you take the fingerprint is not correct.
And not only that, it's some places it's used to be the FBI had a bunch of fingerprints, right? Some. Military, police,
Yeah. People in
other
jail.
people in jail, people arrested, that kind of stuff. But it was all manual fingerprint cards.
Yes,
It
so-
was filing cabinets and roller skates. That's how they used to get around by looking
Yeah.
at them. But then we computerize it, so there are some national fingerprint databases that are very small, and there are some regional databases that are small. Regional meaning like 3 or 4 states get together and share resources. But just because you do a fingerprint check here doesn't mean you didn't do one over here.
Yes.
And did a check. It's not meaning it's in no database, it's just not in the one you checked. And they're not all connected. They don't talk to each other.
In Mexico, they're starting to get in these databases, so they get from other different states, and when they come to Mexico City and state of Mexico, there was a lot of fingerprints. So they start saying, okay, we cannot get every fingerprints, or we're gonna get the most important fingerprints. So that's the problem.
That's the other. So the next thing is also, along with this technological fakery, is this notion that if there's a match of DNA or fingerprints, that a big thing will flash on a computer
Yeah.
screen. Let me help you. There is no computer screen. This is not a thing. In fact, one of the biggest problems that you have with the federal government in our country is a lot of our most sensitive systems are still on the green screen technology.
Yes.
Like our nuclear launch codes, still green screen. Still big, huge floppy disks.
Yeah.
Because then they can't get rid of it because it's what they use. So
Exactly.
anyway, that's neither here nor there, but it's this notion that there is this super high speed, super technological solutions out there, they just don't exist. If they do exist, it's in private, not in government.
Yes.
Government is way behind.
Yeah, of
Think of
course.
the Veterans Administration problem we have in the United States. A lot of the files are still paper files. They don't have a computer database at all. That's why there's so many problems. Or they're trying to database and they've got some money for it, but they're not doing it. They just don't have the time. And the last one is that you have people working in crime scenes while they're eating sandwiches or, drinking or smoking cigarettes. That may have been how it was done back in the old days. I'm not so sure. But the reality is it's a TV device to show like apathy or desensitization. If you see somebody doing that in real life, they can be fired. If somebody's eating a sandwich in a crime scene or drinking a Coke or a soda, it's a huge problem.
Smoking, right?
Smoking's a
They
big
do
one.
a lot of smoking.
Now, why did they have the smoking one? Why did that? Because it was for the smell.
Yeah.
Back in the day, the archetypal homicide detective was a big fat guy smoking a cigar.
Yeah.
Because to get rid of the smell of the thing. The problem is nowadays, that was back before DNA was around, it was still a bad idea because leaving cigarettes in the ashtray could cause a problem, but more importantly, the ashes themselves were fiery, they could start fires, they could burn evidence, they could land on stuff. It's actually very bad. So it was always a bad idea. There was never a time when that was a good idea, but now that we know there's so much more to be gathered, it's super dangerous. If you're trying to emulate what's on TV, that's a good way to demonstrate that you have no real knowledge, skill, or ability. You're just emulating TV behavior. Again, there's a lot of this stuff that comes from television, it comes from movies where people are emulating that because they don't have actual training. And that's a real good way for real professionals to identify people who are not quite that capable. They're just copying, they're just a photocopy of a TV expert. They're not somebody who actually knows what they're doing. Let's see. I had a case one time where it was a triple homicide where they only had 3 hours to work the scene because their director wasn't going to put them on overtime. So they all got mad. They all ordered lunch and just ate it and left all there was Dairy Queen. They left all their Dairy Queen wrappers in the crime scene. The crime scene unit came the next day and processed the scene, and they pulled everything out, and they got matches to all the people. They spent thousands of dollars doing DNA testing on this stuff that they thought was from the crime scene. It was just the homicide detectives leaving their shit in the crime scene.
Or the famous case of this multiple serial that were talking in the media, and who was somehow putting his DNA in every sample taker of the DNA, because he was in the factory they use. So DNA is very effective. There's a lot of background science behind that, but all the problem is around that, you know.
Right. The problem is not doing the reconstruction, not sourcing it back. That's a big problem. So we talked about this. The way this is a problem is it creates unrealistic expectations for the prosecution, but it also creates unreasonable bias against the defense, such that there's this notion that the state's experts are infallible. They have secret special access to things they can't talk about. No, that's not how it works. If somebody, one of the things I love is when people tell me, oh, well, you don't work for the state, so you don't have access to all the stuff. No, actually, that's not true. Maybe in other countries that's true. In the United States, we have an open discovery policy where if there's something that our state is doing and it's presenting it as evidence in court, it has to be discoverable. There has to be a report about it. So every single high-level technology that's being brought to bear on a criminal investigation, that's used in a criminal investigation, has to be discovered to the defense. There can be no secrets.
Other thing that you can use to identify someone who doesn't know what he's doing is the idea that you need to be in the crime scene.
Oh God, yeah.
In order to work in forensic science, you know, like you never be in a crime scene or whatever, because the experience to be, like you say,
standing there smelling things, staring shit, not fucking things up.
That's for police. They love to think that that's what the forensic are doing, because they're not seeing all the science, and they don't get all the science behind that.
No. The job of the police is to do the crime scene processing, and that's not science, that's processing.
Yes.
That's being a technician. The science happens at the lab, and then later on with all the results of all the interpretations that occur using the scientific method. Being inside of a crime scene is not the job of a forensic scientist. That's the job of a crime scene technician.
Exactly.
And their job is, again, to collect and document and package and store, not to test, not to interpret, because they're not qualified. They're not qualified at all. If you're somebody that has a badge on your person, you should not be interpreting evidence for anybody. That you should want, and you should not want that to be your job. You should want your job to be to take it to the scientists and have them be an objective screen to filter out bad ideas.
Yes.
You want them there to serve that role, so you're not promoting bad science. All right, so let's talk about very quickly the FBI effect. The FBI is different than the CSI effect. It's essentially this notion that the FBI sets the gold standard for all manner of criminal investigation and forensic analysis. The corollary being that anybody who's an FBI agent is an expert in all areas of crime and has more knowledge, skills, and ability than anybody else on the planet when it comes to any area related to anything of any type. This is a notion that they will tell to you.
It's a very, this effect, I think, is one of the least explored effects, because I see a lot of people quoting the FBI, like the FBI says that serial killer, whatever. No? It's like, why you're quoting the FBI?
So the FBI has lab scandals that go back to 1995, and all of us involved in the forensic science community, from the independent sphere, have been able to talk about it for 30 years now. It's been more than 28 years for me that I've been, not 28, 20, so 1995, so 22 years for me. I've been talking about it and publishing about it and writing about it. But not everybody can, because a lot of people are dependent on the FBI for funding. They're dependent on the FBI for jobs or for resources, or they're part of the law enforcement community and they're loath to be critical of them. But these scandals go back decades and they're not addressed. Well, we'll just show one right now, the most recent one.
Tonight, the FBI is notifying hundreds of convicts nationwide that flawed analysis of hair samples at the FBI lab may have resulted in their convictions. Some of the defendants won't get the notice. They've already been executed. Here's Julianna Goldman.
I just kept on believing that someone would look into my story and see that I was telling the truth, that I was innocent.
Cleveland Wright spent 28 years, nearly half his life behind bars, convicted in a 1978 murder where prosecutors linked him to hair found near the crime scene. At the time, examiners only relied on microscopic hair analysis, which compares features like shape and color. But in 2012, more accurate DNA testing on those strands revealed that the FBI lab was wrong.
Thank God for the investigators that they're looking into other cases. You know, they need to look into the other cases.
A new study found that from the 1970s through 1999, most of the FBI's examiners in the hair comparison unit provided erroneous information at trial. And in 268 cases where those forensics led to a conviction, 96% of the time it was based on flawed analysis. 9 of those defendants were executed, while 5 others died on death row.
Those numbers are just from one area. We're going to see a much bigger problem.
Dr. Frederick Whitehurst is an FBI whistleblower whose complaints ultimately led to a Justice Department review.
It isn't about vindication. It's about the people that have been harmed and our image of our justice system that has been harmed by the FBI's inability to police its own.
There are no indications the mistakes were intentional, and just because there were errors, it doesn't mean that everyone who was convicted was innocent. Scott Today FBI Director James Comey said that sometimes justice is when we find a mistake. That means going back to fix it.
Julianna Goldman.
Okay, so that's fair comment. Let's accept that that's fair comment. However, there is one huge glaring indication that this was intentional. Can you tell me what it is?
About the science?
The science being intentionally flawed. What's the one indication that we know that this is intentional? Actually, there's 2.
I don't know.
One, it's been going on since it's been identified.
You're right, 20 years.
It's been identified since 19. This is from 2 years ago. That news clip 2 years ago. It's been identified as a problem since 1995, and they've done nothing to fix it. That's the first problem. So that's in terms of negligence, they don't have a leg to stand on. The second issue is whenever there's a mistake, it's always on the side. It's always for the prosecution. There's never a mistake in the favor of the defense.
Exactly.
Not ever. So since there's never a mistake in the favor of the defense, and it's been going on for 3 decades, and they haven't fixed it, you can't argue that it's not intentional.
You're right.
You can't. When the issue is not anything else other than
some guy who runs free because
that didn't happen.
Okay,
No.
Get it.
Exactly. Nobody got free because of this stuff. Everybody got convicted. Here's how it works. They go in and they claim there's research that there isn't. They claim they have statistics and probabilities that they don't, or they claim matches that are not possibly with confidence levels that are too high. And when anybody ever tried to rein them in, like myself or other people, they were maligned like you would not believe. It's now only in the last 5 or 6 years that it's been okay to even talk about the FBI's having these kinds of problems. They have this same problem, by the way, in DNA. They have the same problem in fingerprinting. They had to get rid of their comparative bullet lead metal analysis unit. And let's see, what's the other one? Hair and fiber. I'm trying to think.
Firearms?
Firearms and Toolworks hasn't had one yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming.
It's coming because they're overstating findings of that all the time.
That happens a lot in Mexico.
Yeah, they're claiming, the ejector patterns are unique.
The ejector is unique because there's no other gun in the world.
And the problem is they haven't done the research to prove that. In fact, every time a gun fires, it does something different.
Yes.
And anybody who fires a gun knows that, but they want to be able to say it's unique, so they go into court saying it's unique.
Also, it's obviously handwriting, and fire and pathology too.
Forensic pathology has no gun. There's no science in forensic pathology almost. It's
It's appreciation of some forms and shapes.
But the great news, the reason that we're learning this stuff is because of DNA. DNA is actually the one leading the charge.
Of course.
Revealing all this flawed forensics. But here's the important thing to take away from this. 15 people were put to death based on bad evidence. And where that evidence was crucial to their conviction. Which means that you take that away, they don't have the evidence for their conviction, which means they're innocent. So that means potentially 15 innocent people were put to death because of this. Yeah. It's amazing to me. There's less of, not as much of an outcry. But this notion that the FBI is the premier investigative agency or the premier forensic science agency, it's just not earned and it's not borne out. It's great for PR, it's great for sort of their image, but it's not true. I'm not saying there's not good people at the FBI, there are. I'm not saying there's not good forensic scientists at the FBI, there are. What I'm saying is there's some cultural problems there that are shared by many law enforcement agencies around the world. And to pretend that they are somehow immune from those things is only that, it's only pretend. We have to start acknowledging that they have real problems before we can fix it. Of course, that's my opinion. So, First myth about the FBI. FBI agents are experts in areas of murder and sex crimes investigation. This is false. The FBI does not have charter to work sex crimes or homicides unless they occur on federal property. And even then, they'll very often defer to local law enforcement. So FBI agents mostly are accountants and lawyers, and they do not have sex crimes experience. They do not have homicide experience.
What they show in movies is that they call the FBI because they have the experience, or I mean, it's not a federal.
Yeah.
But they still like, oh, we need to call the FBI.
How do I explain this? The FBI is responsible for investigating federal crimes, terrorism, kidnapping, gang-related crimes, in terms of organized crime, RICO crimes, but also white-collar crimes.
Terrorism?
Terrorism, yes, but usually on foreign soil. If there's crossing of state lines, yes.
Yeah,
they have anti-terrorism units, that's good. But homicide is not a federal crime, and rape is not a federal crime. These are local crimes handled by local detectives. So in terms of being in a crime scene with a body, or in terms of interviewing a sex crimes victim, that's not what they do, nor would they know how to do it. In fact, I know this to be true from an applied perspective, because when one of my co-authors went and worked with the FBI on the task force, he had to train all the agents he worked with on how to do an actual interview. They thought doing an interview was having a list of 5 questions, talking to the people, and if they said no, they were done. You just go and you say, here's the list of questions, you talk to them, and if they say no, we're all through, we can go. And John's like, what the hell is that?
Did you do
this? No.
the murder?
No. Okay. That's right. No, there are people.
Are you sure?
There are people. I have worked cases where investigators do that very thing. They have 20 people to interview. They want to get it all done in an hour, so they have a list of 3 questions, and they ask them, and they think, well, I'm a human lie detector. I can tell when they're lying to me. So if I ask them to their face, then I'm just going to be able to tell. It's ridiculous. And Savino's like, what the hell was that? That was an interview. He goes, no, it wasn't. So they go, let's go back. They went back and they talked to the guy for an hour and a half and got all the information out of him. And they were just so amazed they had him train all their people how to do it. Because these are people who, if they're coming right from the academy, right from college, they're going to the FBI academy, they're learning FBI stuff, but the FBI doesn't teach interview interrogation. The FBI doesn't teach sex crimes investigation. The FBI doesn't teach homicide investigation. They don't have that. That's not what they do. So this notion is false, right? But that would be okay, unless that'd be okay, except that FBI agents, when they retire and they go into private practice, they want people to think they're experts in homicide investigation.
Exactly. That's what this myth grow a lot, because we're not talking actually about the FBI.
Yeah, we're not.
Ex-FBI agents.
Yeah.
In order to have work, they start saying some things like, "Oh, I work 1,000 homicides or 1,000 whatever," because they can go to court, they can have some money, they can write some book.
And every time these statements get tested in court, they fail. They wind up getting in trouble because, oh, I don't know which case. Can you give us an example of the case? No. Do you have any access to it? No.
Because it's secret.
Because it's secret, or it's this or that. Well, then you're not an expert. Get out. They don't understand that they can't just bluff their way through the process, and because that's not how it works. There's actual testimony that must be given and discovery that must be provided, and everything must be able to be questioned.
Yeah.
So this reality is not something that most FBI agents want to acknowledge, and they'll parse around it. Well, we did a lot of gang-related violent crime. Yeah. They'll say, I'm an expert in violent crime. Homicides? No. Rapes? No. Then what are we talking about? Gangs?
Or they say they not work by himself the crime, but they give advice to the detective.
Right, they consulted.
They consulted, yeah.
That's not a thing. I mean, for the FBI.
For the FBI, yeah.
They get to consult one time, then they usually don't get asked back. FBI agents, myth number 2, FBI agents receive special training unavailable to anybody else in the world. That is not true at all. We put the FBI agents on the stand and we ask them what their training regimen is. Very often it's videos and books that we all have access to, especially the FBI profilers.
Yes, because that's how science works.
Yep, that's how science works. Everybody has access to it. The training available to the FBI is the same available to anybody else in law enforcement, and all that's usually from the private sector anyway. There's no special secret law enforcement training.
And the most important thing is, the problem is that, like every agency in the world, they get trained by themselves.
Yes. So they think it's special and secret, but the reality is those people doing internal training are just borrowing from what's in the published literature.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. They just have to acknowledge it's not. They're not the ones. They don't have the special knowledge. When they are under oath, this all has to come out, and that's why they avoid going under oath if they can. You put an FBI agent under oath, you can ask them all this stuff. It's not even a problem, and it all has to come out. Myth number 3: FBI agents have special access to secret high-tech databases and are able to search complex strings of information in real time. No, they don't.
Oh,
No,
come on.
they don't. They don't have. There are no high-tech secret special access databases.
But there's so many movies that result in that matter.
Exactly. But here's the thing: if those things,
So many good movies. So good
if they
movies.
had those databases, they would have to reveal them when they were under oath
Of
in
course.
voir dire, because they would be asked, "What database did you use?" Nothing. You know, there isn't one. There aren't secret special databases
Remember
that can be used in criminal cases.
in Seven, the movie?
Yes.
That's how they resolved
Oh
it.
no, that's not how. You know how they resolved it, right?
Because there
the
was
library.
a special library, the
They have
special database.
keyword search documents in the library. That is not a real thing. There's nobody tracking keyword because a lot of the times
Come on, that was
people don't-
1995. something.
Exactly. There's no actual digital database of what people are actually searching. You can go on their Google search and look at
Who's
that. Maybe
looking?
Mark Zuckerberg has that, but we don't have
Well,
that.
we-
Yeah. Shit, Mark is listening right now. All right, so myth number 4, all FBI agents are experts in interview and interrogation. We already covered that. They're not. It's not what they do. In fact, they're very, very bad at it because they do things in two. They don't deal with the same kind of criminals that are dealt with by the regular police. And they have a very bureaucratic approach, which is list related. But worse than that is that they don't record their interviews. They don't audio record or videotape them, which DOJ has gotten in huge trouble for in foreign countries and here in the U.S. They've actually lost some big cases because of it. A big guideline came out in 2011, something came out. They was going to change everything. The DOJ yawned, like, we're not recording shit, we're not documenting shit, we're just going to do it. We're going to talk to people and make handwritten notes, and if we don't like what they said, we'll destroy them.
Yeah.
That's what they do. So not only did they not know how to do it, they don't know how to do it in a forensic capacity to document it so that it's court-worthy. They've had so many cases kicked out because of this practice, and the reason they say is because they don't want people to know their secret techniques.
Yeah.
If they recorded them, it would be secret techniques would be revealed. There isn't. They use the Reed technique. It's the same as everybody else. And
The
it's
one
and
who's
it's
not using by the FBI
right
right now.
And that Reed technique, which was around for about 30 years, finally got demonstrated to be the origin of so many false confessions
course.
that it was actually determined to be unreliable. So anybody who still uses that is actually antiquated.
It's been used a lot because this appealing that the FBI has is being brought to other countries and say, well, I'm a former FBI or whatever, I will give
Right.
you special training.
Special training, right?
And they give you the Reed technique, they give him like...
Nothing special. It's
nothing-
nothing special at all. It's what everybody else had, but you slap the label FBI on it. It's great branding, it's great marketing, but it's not a real thing.
Yeah.
And the reason, again, that we know this is because in the world of court, they get under oath and they have to answer truthfully and honestly, and they can't lie.
Yeah.
And if there were things that were anything that they do, any technique they use, any database they use, that's all public. That's all knowledge.
The rest is anecdotal.
Yeah,
you know?
everything. Yeah, exactly right. So myth number 5: the FBI crime lab sets the gold standard for scientific practice and evidence examination. It does not. There have been more scandals at the FBI than any other lab. I mean, it's just over and over again. We're demonstrating that a lot of them are making it up as they go. In fact, if you have somebody who works in the crime lab and they commit fraud, you know what they do? They don't fire you. Usually they make you a field agent. They put you out in the field. Because all people who work for the FBI, even the crime lab, are special agents. I know that there's some balking at that, but everyone that I've met is.
Now, other problem is that sometimes they do a special new technology for the case. You know, it's not like there's
Right.
this new field that are discovering this.
Yeah.
No, they have this case and they need some special lab testing, and they come up with that. So that's a very big problem.
And here's the final myth, and is the most dangerous one. And that is that the FBI exists as this special secret agency, super skilled, super competent, and that if everything else fails in society,
Yeah.
if every other law enforcement agency fails to get justice, if every other mechanism that is in place in our society fails with its responsibility, the FBI will be there, they will step in, and they will solve the problem. So this notion, this myth that the FBI is there as some sort of sugar daddy that's going to take care of all the problems, that exists to make us feel good about all the other problems that we have.
Yeah.
The reality is, see myths 1 through 5. They're not the premier agency. They're not the sugar daddy. They're not going to solve all the problems, and they certainly aren't the premier agency. And their existence, because you'll hear things like, well, yeah, there's a serial killer. Well, won't the FBI take care of that? Didn't the FBI take care of that?
Yeah.
And there's a murderer out there. Well, won't the FBI take? There's a corrupt police agent. Won't the FBI take care of that? No, they won't. Not necessarily. Sometimes yes, rare, but not very often. It has to be a case of public interest if they're going to take over. And what that means is it's a case that will make them look good when they solve it. Now, I'm not saying that, again, all FBI agents are bad. I'm not saying the FBI is even a bad thing. I'm saying that the FBI is no different than any other bureaucratic organization. It's only as good as the people that are there, and there are myths that it has propagated, that it has perpetrated and encouraged and nurtured because it helps them.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge that, or else we are going to.
And also, I think it's interesting to see how I recommend this Mindhunter series in Netflix, because he has one layer when they kind of talk about this, what we are talking about, the bureaucracy, and how this, some person to be in the FBI start believing that he has a special knowledge and power. And it's very interesting how this develop in all the chapters, so we recommend to see that.
Mindhunter, by David,
David Fincher.
David Fincher's Mindhunter. It's very good. It shows a lot of these bureaucratic problems, but it's about the problem of culture. Thinking that you're the best, being told that you're the best, acting like you're the best, that you're special. And therefore, you start acting that way and thinking that way, you start thinking it's true and you don't check it.
And most important, you start thinking that as you're dealing with some scientific facts, you start thinking that you're a scientist.
That's the problem. You think one of my favorite lines from I was working with a law firm in Washington D.C. and the lawyer who brought me on board for this case, it was a rape homicide. He goes, I've been looking at these and I've become somewhat of an expert in bloodstain pattern analysis myself, having to look at this case, and I'm like, you don't know what that word means. That is not what you are. You are somebody who has read a document. You are not an expert. That is not how you demonstrate expertise. And you become an expert in your own mind because you know very little. The less you know about something, the simpler it seems.
Yeah. What's the name? Kroner-Duggar effect?
The Kruger-Dunning effect. So we talked about this earlier already, the difference between crime scene investigation and crime reconstruction. And that is, again, the crime scene investigation has many different stages. It's a process, and it has everything to do from the time the crime is discovered, the evidence is collected and documented, to when it's tested, and then used to further the investigation. That's crime scene investigation in general. There are many different books that talk about this. It's not complicated. Nobody's reading these books because nobody reads anymore, but they exist. The literature is very clear on this. Even the people who wrote these books are no longer saying these things out loud, which is kind of amazing to me. They've gotten older and they're making money off of pretending they have secret special powers, so they don't talk about it anymore. There is not this idea of everything that happens inside the barrier tape is what's important. The barrier tape is actually a big problem. It's there for security purposes, but the barrier tape is there to be moved as you discover new things.
Yes.
Right? Crime reconstruction, according to DeForest, he does a great definition, is the culmination of the scientific work on the physical evidence in the case. The culmination of the scientific work. The stage where the information gleaned from the examination of the evidence is integrated and interpreted to yield an objective understanding of the event. This activity is given insufficient scientific attention in most jurisdictions. Basically, the crime reconstruction is important. It's the interpretive stage, and most places they're not doing it at all. In fact, I'll give you one better. Most cases don't get a reconstruction unless someone like me gets hired for the other side. Or
that's a very big problem, right?
Yeah, huge. I would say less than 5% of all criminal cases get reconstructed at all, in any way. Like, I've got a case right now where I'm asking for the shooting incident reconstruction, the bloodstain pattern analysis. Like, well, we took pictures of it, and that's not enough. You take pictures of it, it's not the same as having a forensic person coming in to do that. That used to be mandatory and standard, but now in the advent of DNA, we're just not doing it. Okay. There's also digital evidence to consider, and that's a whole other separate issue, but very important, so avail yourself to that. Scientific crime reconstruction is distinct in process and reliability from reconstruction efforts attempted by non-scientists, by those in law enforcement, or by those with a vested interest in the outcome. It has to be done by somebody with no interest in the outcome, somebody who is a scientist, and someone who is working with all the evidence and all the pieces, and someone who's then taking that and comparing it to the statements, comparing it to the bigger picture, and using it to either drive the investigation or to inform a legal proceeding. Because reconstruction, again, should not be the end, it should be the beginning where it leads you to more evidence and more information. right?
We should have we have in the old system in Mexico.
Yep.
They call it Reconstruction, but it was not a scientific process. It was like the lawyers. What they do in the O.J. Simpson case, remember? They go to the house and trying to see the house.
It's a reenactment.
Reenactment, something like that, but they call it the same.
Yeah.
That was the problem because the result of that.
A reenactment is one way to help inform a reconstruction. The reconstruction should be based on multiple parts, not just the ballistics, not just the blood stain, not just the medical examiner's report, but doing a reenactment is the purpose of doing that is what? Is to determine whether or not certain things are possible.
Exactly.
I'll give you an example. We had a case one time where a victim claimed she was sexually assaulted and that her hands were taped together, all right? And she claimed that she broke free of this binding. And it didn't look right. It looked like the binding had actually been cut. So we put a bunch of detectives in the binding to see if they could get out, and they couldn't. That was a reenactment of this very particular type of binding. And then eventually we were able to confront her with that variable, and in a way that induced her to give a confession to make a false report. She had cut herself out.
It's to test theories that you have, not for put it in the court as a scientific result. Like, okay, we put 5 detectives and we it's not like that.
No.
That's a very big difference that in most television shows and most people doesn't understand. There's difference in the forensic field, and the other one is to try to understand better and then do a scientific.
Well, there's the issue right there. Trying to understand something better.
Yeah.
Accepting at the outset that there's things that you don't know, that you need to learn about, and that you don't know. Again, the humility. You don't know the answer. Can you go into a scenario? Can you go into a situation and acknowledge that you don't know the answer, that you don't know the outcome, that you might have seen similar events many times, but this might be different.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
Yeah, that's very hard.
Can you? It's so fucking hard. Especially, I mean, we make the same mistake with people. We make the same mistake with every single part of our lives. It's a big problem. Thinking that we know the result already. That's the biggest barrier to the truth. Right?
Exactly.
So, let's see. This is a case I worked on in Kansas. Kansas versus Artist Con. It is a young lady who was in the military. Her husband's in the military. He's out on maneuvers. And she was found naked, except for her bra, and she had like a little top on as well, in her home. She was dead. She had been manually strangled. All right? Her name was Casey Blount. Her infant daughter, Alana Blount, was found dead upstairs in the crib. All right? She had been dead for a couple days. So, the medical examiner concluded that the victim that the baby had died from dehydration. That was their inference, because the baby hadn't been fed. Now, I'm not a medical examiner, but I knew this guy had never looked at one of these cases, and I looked at all the variables. I read the autopsy report. The baby's diaper was clean, and its stomach was half full of some food, and its bowel was full of food and poop. So what does that mean? Did they not eat for 3 days and die of dehydration takes about 2 to 3 days.
Of course.
Did they die in 3 days? Did that how long it took? The answer to the question is what?
They have in the bowel. What is the bowel?
In the bowel, in their intestines.
Okay.
They had fecal matter in their intestines. They hadn't been pooped out yet. They had undissolved food,
they died.
and they had a half full stomach, and their diaper was empty. And they said that they were alive. That the medical examiner said this baby was alive for at least 2 to 3 days and died of dehydration.
Of course.
And I'm like, no, they didn't.
No,
and they're like, well, you're not a medical examiner. You can't say that. And I said,
I know how human body.
I said, yeah, I don't need to be. Well, are you an expert? Are you a medical doctor? Then you don't know how the human body works. I'm like, well, I wrote in my report, this baby did not die from dehydration because. Tell me why. You just have a new son. Tell me how many times your baby fills his diaper every hour.
You need to change it, 6 times at least.
An hour?
I mean, because it's urine, it's poop,
everything.
That's why they use diapers.
So a clean diaper after 3 days?
No, come on.
It's not possible.
It's not possible.
It's not. It's totally.
No.
It's a fiction. And this doctor, and I asked, I said, does this doctor have kids? No. Is he married? No. I'm like, okay. And then, well, now I know. And I didn't have kids at the time, but I mean, I knew, I'm not stupid.
Of
I mean,
course.
I've been around kids.
You're not.
I was a kid. I used to poop my own pants as a child, so I'm kind of an expert in that.
Yeah, no,
According to my mother.
That's a very, yes, exactly.
It's a basic Reconstruction element that people, you hear a doctor say it, and it becomes law, and it goes on the record as what this guy did.
And change the whole history of the.
Well, not just the history of the case, changes the criminal charges.
Yeah.
I was giving the prosecutor a help here.
Yeah.
But they're like, oh shit, if this happened, then somebody killed this baby.
Of course.
It's pretty clear somebody probably suffocated the kid, but reality, I can't prove that. What I can prove is, physically and biologically, the kid was not alive for 3 days and to die of dehydration. There's a test to confirm dehydration the death you have to do. The doctor didn't do it. He just said, well, based on my medical education.
So he do a clinical.
He did nothing. He
Just-
looked at the body and he assumed, he was told by the police that the baby
And
was.
he
Three
says,
days.
oh, so dehydrated baby?
What?
Looks like baby, dehydrated baby. Okay.
Looks
Okay,
like
yes,
it. Looks like
exactly.
it. But he didn't look at anything else.
Because he heard that it was 3 days.
Yeah, the police told him the baby was up there by itself for at least 3 days. So he thought the police were saying that, so he just repeated back what they said. A lot of what the
That's,
medical examiner does is to repeat back the theories of
That
police and put
happens
it
a
out
lot
there.
in rape investigation.
Yep. So this is a very important case because the victimology is pretty important. She had DNA in her from 2 different people, none of which matched the guy that they arrested and put on trial.
Yeah.
The guy who did it, he confessed to maybe doing this in a dream because of using the Reed technique. He was very mentally underdeveloped. I gave evidence in the case, and basically when I testified, they told me I couldn't say the thing about the thing. I said, well, I'm leaving it in my, they said, you need to take that out of your report. I said, I'm not taking it out of my report. They said, why not? And I said, because when this case goes under appeal, I'm not gonna be the asshole that missed this. That's you guys. And my client's like, whoa, okay. I'm like, no, that's you. You guys missed this. I'm not missing this.
Yes.
This is going on the record that I'm seeing this, and you're not saying anything. I have grown very tired of having lawyers tell me to put things in or take things out of reports. I don't care what lawyers think. I'll listen to what they have to say, but the lawyer is not the forensic scientist, and they don't decide what the scientific evidence is that's relevant. And what I've learned is 9 times out of 10, later on down the road, you're going to get burned with the fact that you left that out.
Of course.
So my name's going on the report, that thing's going in. The judge can say I can't talk about it, but it's in my report. So when the appellate attorney gets my report, they're going to read it. And they're going to know exactly what to do. She was having an affair with about, well, what she was actually doing was having sex with about 10 different guys. And they would just sit in the downstairs area, and she would go upstairs and have sex with them. That was her thing. She liked to have sex with men. I don't think she was even like a prostitute or anything. She just liked to have sex with men. So when her husband was out of maneuvers, that was her thing.
So one of those men.
The guy who turned in Artist Cobb, his DNA is in her from that day. He's like, oh yeah, we all had sex with her, and she had sex. He had sex with her too, but then he got embarrassed, so he killed her. I'm pretty sure.
She?
No, I'm sorry, he.
He, okay.
Yeah, there was 3 guys. One of the guys is named Kenneth Jones or something like that, and his DNA was inside of her.
Okay.
And he said, oh yeah, Artist Cobb, yeah, he had sex with her and he ejaculated in her, and I think he just strangled her to death. That's what we think. Because she was alive when we all left.
Yeah.
So the only guy whose DNA is in there, he's the one guy they didn't arrest. He's their snitch.
He's the snitch.
He's the smart guy. The
Oh.
dumb guy's the one like,
That
whoop.
happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
You try to build a case with a snitch, and you need to
Ignore the evidence. You need to start ignoring evidence.
Ignoring evidence.
When you're working with a snitch, the fact that you're working with a bad snitch is often indicated by the fact that you have to start ignoring the physical evidence.
Yeah.
And we've not hit upon this enough, but I think this bears mentioning. The reason that law enforcement make arrests with statement testimony or confession testimony or witness testimony is because they can. They can get an arrest warrant with just somebody saying something. And even if the physical evidence doesn't match up with what that person's saying, that warrant is enough to take them to court, and it's even enough to put them on trial in many jurisdictions. Depends entirely on the character and temperament of the prosecutor. The prosecutor can end that at any time. Too often they don't, because they don't want a political problem. Too often they're not going to take a red pen to law enforcement investigations. Sometimes they will, but then they risk making a bad relationship with the police. And that's why some places there's a too close of a relationship with law enforcement and prosecution, and in some places there's a terrible relationship. What you need is an understanding of the relationship. Law enforcement is there to conduct their investigation, and if the prosecution allows shitty cases to go forward, law enforcement isn't going to get better. Law enforcement are only as good as the prosecutors in their jurisdiction require. That's my summary of my view on that. My experience tells me that. Anyway, poopy diaper case. Right, so I'm going to I'll provide this report, this actual finding along with this lecture, make it available. But the crime scene analysis is the final part, is when you take all the processing efforts, the crime scene collection efforts, the crime scene reconstruction efforts, and you put them into one report where you're trying to determine how decisions were made. It's the big picture part. It's the reason that I get hired on many cases. It's because you're figuring out the modus operandi elements. You're looking at physical evidence, victimology, and crime scene characteristics. You're trying to figure out how to categorize and explain the decisions that were made at the scene. How did they get in, how did they get out, what they bring, what they take behind, what they leave behind, what was the method of killing, what kind of evidence did that result in, how did they clean up with their precautionary acts. All these things that give you insight into what actually occurred. A real picture of what actually occurred begins to emerge once you start doing crime scene analysis and considering these other things. That level of inquiry is often missing. And that's the level of work and attention to detail that too many professionals are not willing to do, because they have bought into a bureaucratic model of crime scene investigation where they are doing just their little part of the job and that's it. And they're not understanding the bigger part of the crime. Respond to that before we end for the day.
Well, that happens a lot when we start going to the adversarial system. The government start talking about, well, now we're going to use science to solve crimes. And they show us pictures of crime scene technicians, people with all these things, because it's easy to understand, because the CSI effect and all these things you're talking about. Science is one guy taking a lot of care of collecting things.
Right.
That's science, that's science. You need to, you find a fingerprint and you see without lens to see something, because that's the part of science to get with discovery. But the problem in science is to get an opinion, to say something about it, because you do
it's what it means.
Exactly.
And what it means within the confines of a very carefully crafted statement that doesn't overstate or understate the facts and the evidence.
Yes.
And a statement that considers the other available facts and evidence. So you're not just doing it in a vacuum.
Yes.
You're not talking about a piece of evidence in a vacuum. Collection of evidence is not, this is how I'm going to put it. It's very, I think this is a bigger conversation needs to be had about this. There's a difference between science and technology.
Yes.
There's science, scientific protocols, and technology. The protocols are the rules you got to follow when you're doing stuff. Science is how you are when the nature and the way that you interpret things to make sure you're
the logic behind
the logic and the accuracy and the literature behind what you're doing. All right. Technology is the tools that you use to collect the evidence. For example, we have a computer here. This computer represents technology. This computer is not science. It does not represent science. Things on a computer are not more scientific. Things with numbers are not more scientific. This has numbers. It's got a page number.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's scientific? No. It's got letters. It's got references. Does that mean it's scientific? No. It's just technology putting a book page on the screen. That's technology. There was scientific discovery in the development of this technology, and there's a scientific process to it. But the scientific method remains the same whether you're using computers or whether you're using, stone-made tools. The scientific method is the same.
Yeah.
It's all about this process of discovery and learning and building knowledge. Whereas technology is about advancing the tools that we have to make them more refined, make them more precise, make them more advanced, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and you can see that in the language they use.
Yes.
One people who are trying to
conclude our thoughts here, crime reconstruction is one part of a process that is related to crime scene investigation. But crime scene investigation is more of a big picture process. If you don't do the evidence collection right, you can't do the reconstruction right. If you don't do the reconstruction right, you can't inform your investigation properly. All of these things are related, and they all take different levels, different types of professionals. One person can't and shouldn't do it all. The problem is, from my perspective, that there are too many people who want to own the whole process and who want to appear to be uber experts or super experts when they're actually not. I always find that to be troubling, because I like to be considered knowledgeable in my areas, but I don't like to be considered the only one who knows anything about anything.
Yes.
That idea bothers me. Talk to me a little bit about that from your experience.
Well, I think one aspect of that is that one real people who does reconstruction or crime scene analysis understand that their findings and their opinions are good as the information that he has at the time.
Right, they're only as good as you have at a given moment, and they can change.
They can change. Maybe in the future we know another stuff, so you need to change your opinion.
And that
or
requires a level of humility that
exactly that is related to the actually scientific process.
And it also means you've got to be comfortable being wrong.
Being wrong, like, no, you were wrong because now we find out, okay.
Yeah, and all you have to do is say, you know what, oh, that's what I knew then. Now that changes everything. Let's do that. Let's
see how this, impact all the whole theory.
I feel like it's related to identity. You associate yourself with being a scientist in the scientific process, that's good. If you associate yourself with being the person who knows everything and is right all the time, and associate yourself with the quality of your theories being perfect every time, that's dangerous.
Yes.
Because science is about revision.
Yes.
Science is about learning. It's about developing. It's not about being perfect, and it's certainly not about being the only one who knows anything.
Yes.
So this idea that there is special knowledge that only certain people can have, it's designed by, as far as I can tell, extremely dumb people to conceal their ignorance from other people.
Yeah, and
to create a cult
and
following rather than a scientific body of knowledge.
As we were talking, that's how the media reflects the experts. Super smart people, but super technology, and there's not anyone, or they're not having this discussion, and they're not reading.
Oh my God!
Even Dr. House never read nothing. She's just thinking about how's the diagnosis of this.
Only Dr. Reed reads.
Yes, exactly. Reads. They go to see. That's what the scientists do.
They go look it up.
They go to look it up because they don't know everything. Exactly.
And you can't know everything. It's not. That is something right there. Just to be very clear, it is not possible to know everything. That's why you have colleagues, because they know different things than you. They have different knowledge. So when you encounter a colleague who doesn't know something, it's not because they're dumb necessarily.
Yeah.
It's because they didn't. Their area of practice and their stuff hasn't taken in that direction, and so your collaboration is required. It's beneficial.
Yeah.
Because they're going to know stuff you don't, and you're going to know stuff they don't. Well, one of my greatest enjoyment that I have is when I meet a student who reads more than me. I love that, because then I have a real opportunity to learn something new.
Yes.
That's exciting to me. It is not exciting to me to stand up in front of groups of people who over and over again are just watching TV, watching movies, and they are learning nothing, and I'm wasting my time.
Yeah.
I never worry that I'm going to be put out of a job, because I've met very few people who are willing to actually do the work. If you want to distinguish yourself in this work, all you got to do is do the reading. The reading, the information's all there, the process is all there, the protocols are all there. The problem is the myths are overshadowing. The number of people who don't know what they're doing that are interested in the field are so overburdened with myths that those myths are overshadowing the actual work.
Yes.
Do you see that to be the case in Latin America?
Yes, it's not only the same, but the problem is that the control that have some government agencies with the rhetoric of science.
Yes.
Because we don't have the FBI, and they don't use the FBI, but we have other institutions who claim to do that. But we have all these other problems that universities, academics, who are not related to the field, now they're saying, it's interesting. So they start to taking their findings or the things they think they know into the problem of violence, and to understand violence, to understand crime. It's a very specific field. You cannot say, well, I'm a clinical psychologist and I treat people who have sexual deviance. Now I'm going to write a book about rape. No, that's another field.
Right.
Because they, see the TV and they say, I'm smart, I can do that. That's the other problem with this.
Yeah.
We start seeing these two fields, the government, that's historical, and now I'm seeing a lot of academics thinking that this is easy. This is like, okay, this is people love that, I will start doing that. No.
When did we become a collection of when did any professional group come to the conclusion that it was easier to just declare expertise not to do it, when they thought it was okay to not do the work?
Yes.
Psychologists have an understanding, because of the nature of their work, that they have to be trained and they have to be educated, they have to follow protocols, and that their work requires a certain amount of time put in and spent on the problem. Doctors, the same thing. Lawyers because of the procedural nature, there's something required there. But criminologists and forensic scientists, it's like they learn a list of tasks and they know less about their discipline than electricians know about theirs.
Yeah. It's a technician sometimes.
Yeah, they're just a technician feeding things into a machine,
Yeah.
reading results and not understanding where
So
they come
if
from.
someone wants to get better, it's about, as you say, in very operative ways, about reading, it's about talking with other colleagues, it's about working cases, obviously,
Yep.
but also it's about to get degrees, to do the academic effort to be expert in one area.
Well, you demonstrate your expertise in three ways to the court: education, training, and experience.
Yeah.
And I get hammered all the time because I get asked, were you ever a police officer? That's the number one question that they attack me with. Were you ever a police officer? So how can you be a forensic scientist?
Yeah.
And I was in court in San Francisco. I'm like, literally, those things have nothing to do with each other. And they're like, well, I don't know where you're from, but here they are. If you are not and I'm like, well, that's just here, and I don't know. Well, I don't know where you're talking about. Your Honor, he's obviously not an expert. He's never been a police officer. He's never been in charge of crime scenes. How can he be a forensic scientist? And I'm just thinking to myself, what planet am I on? This is but that's how it's been regarded for so long that they're tempting you to pretend that you have some kind of connection to those things.
Yeah.
So I have no problem working with police agencies. I have no problem giving training to police officers. I have no problem assisting with processing crime scenes or going back and reprocessing crime scenes. But what I do have a problem with is the way that the criminal justice system, those inside of it, work to control the whole thing from their narrow bureaucratic area. Law enforcement think they're the only ones who know things. Judges think they're the only ones who know things. Lawyers think they're the only ones who know things. Everybody's fighting to control their little piece. And the forensic expert or the forensic scientist, they come in and they participate in their small part, and they become part of this dogfight that's unnecessary, that should be unnecessary and is expensive.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with some experts in polygraph.
Oh, God.
Because I was giving a lecture about how the polygraph doesn't work, whatever, all the sciences behind that. And they were very mad about that because they were asking me, do you have any, do you take the polygraph? No, because, I don't need to.
It's not a real thing.
I don't need to, so there starts to be, because they were lawyers.
Oh,
and they
no.
say, because they were saying, polygraph is about forensic science. And I say, no,
it's
they're
not.
not. Forensic means you go to courtroom. No. And they are like, oh shit.
No, it's
so
all about
forensic
skin
is
reaction
about
to
crime or something like that.
No.
And he says like, we're not lie detectors. That's good.
Right.
What are you doing? We're doing biostatistic analysis. And I said, and you're a lawyer? How do you do biostatistic analysis?
How are you stringing those words together?
What are you stringing? I know sounds very good, biostatistic
it's not a real
analysis.
thing.
But do you are a mathematician? Are you a
Yes.
Are you a biologist? Why are you claiming to do biostatistics? Because it sounds good. And that works in your office, and that works with police, and that works in your institution, but doesn't work in courtroom.
No.
We are in a different worlds, so please stop saying those things. It was fun for me.
It was fun for you, but
Fun for me.
and
Not
as you
for-
know,
but everybody else was not having fun.
and as you know, I beat an FBI polygrapher.
I know.
That was hilarious for me.
Yeah.
And the reality is, it shouldn't be that big of a deal.
No.
But it's a cottage industry. Selling polygraph machines is big business.
Yeah.
And using polygraphs as employment screening tools, that's really big business. Using polygraphs as opposed to having people do follow-up actual work on people who are on parole. They do a lot of polygraphs are used to do weekly tests of sex offenders who are on parole.
Yeah, they do it that.
Which is ridiculous. I mean,
Instead
of actually finding out for real.
Yeah. Exactly.
Did you do it? Did you do it this week? No.
Okay.
Okay, you seem fine.
Yeah.
It is completely bureaucratic. It is
Yeah.
theatrical. It is to check a box so that you can say you did something, not that it actually mattered or worked.
Yeah.
That is the problem. I feel like we need to move to a place where we are being evaluated on the scientific quality of our outcomes and not on whether or not we tick a box, whether or not we have the superficial appearance. We've got the CSI cap, we got the CSI jacket, and we got the glasses and the gloves.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But
By
that's
the way,
not
we're
right.
in Las Vegas, so maybe we can buy something later about that. For
Go to the CSI experience.
Show 'em it.
CSI experience. death and suffering than in an experience.
That's
that you can
important.
have fun.
That's very important. Well, we're going to leave it there. We'll pick this up again later on. This is one conversation in an ongoing series of conversations we're going to keep having as we get older and older and angrier. You're going to see Aurelio get much angrier, much more gray. He's going to lose a lot more hair. I'm going to get really old, lose hair, then buy fake hair and get hair plugs. We're going to be able to do this elapsed time thing. It's going to be great.
It's going to be great. So keep this video.
Keep this video.
Future.
This is an archive. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you join us again the next time we sit down for one of these chats.